A yowl now came from a farther peak, and the old leader paused abruptly in his conversation. It was one of the army outposts, stationed on one of the highest mountains to watch the one foe for which Earth cats fear. The very large, peculiar cats from Saturn, who for some reason have not been oblivious of the charm of our moon's dark side. They are leagued by treaty with the evil toad things and are notoriously hostile to our earthly cats. So that at this junction, a meeting would have been a somewhat grave matter. After a brief consultation of generals, the cats rose and assumed a closer formation, crowding protectingly around Carter and preparing to take the great leap through space back to the housetops of Earth and his dreamland. The old field marshal advised Carter to let himself be borne along smoothly and passively in the massed ranks of furry leapers, and told him how to spring when the rest sprang and land gracefully when the rest landed. He also offered to deposit him in any spot he desired, and Carter decided on the city of Dilathleen, whence the Black Galley had set out, for he wished to sail thence for Oriab and the carven crest of Negranek, and also to warn the people of the city to have no more traffic with black galleys, if indeed that traffic could tactfully be and judiciously broken off. Then upon a signal, the cats all leapt gracefully, with their friend packed securely in their midst, while a black cave on a far-off, unhallowed summit of the Moon Mountains still vainly waited the crawling chaos, the Nyarlathotep. The leap of the cats through space was very swift, and being surrounded by his companions, Carter did not see at this time the great black shapelessnesses that lurk and caper and flounder in the abyss. Before he fully realized what had happened, he was back in his familiar room in Dilathleen, and the stealthy friendly cats were pouring out of the windows in streams. The old leader from Ulthar was the last to leave, and as Carter shook his paw, he said he would be able to get home by cockcrow. When dawn came, Carter went downstairs and learned that a week had elapsed since his capture and leaving. There was still near a fortnight to wait for the ship bound for toward Oriab, and during that time he said he could what he could against the black galleys and their infamous ways. Most of the townsfolk believed him, yet so fond were the jewelers of great rubies that none who would wholly promise to cease trafficking with the wide-mouthed merchants. If aught of evil ever befalls Dilathleen through such traffic, it will not be his fault. In about a week, the desiderate ship put in by the Black Mole and tall lighthouse, and Carter was glad to see that she was a bark of wholesome men, with painted sides and yellow lateen sails and a gray captain in silken robes. Her cargo was the fragrant resin of Oriab's inner groves, and the delicate pottery baked by the artists of Baharna, and the strange little figures carved from Negranek's ancient lava. For this they were paid with the wool of Ulthar, and the iridescent textiles of Hatheg, and the ivory that the black men carve across the river in Parg. Carter made arrangements with his captain to go to Baharna, and was told that the voyage would take 10 days. And during his visit of waiting, he talked much with that captain of Negranek, and was told that very few had seen the carven face thereon. but that most travelers are content to learn its legends from old people and lava gatherers or and image makers in Baharna, and afterward say in their far homes that they have indeed beheld it. The captain was not even sure that any living person now living had beheld that carven face, for the wrong side of Negranak is very difficult and barren and sinister, and there are rumors of caves near the peak wherein dwell the night gaunts. But the captain did not wish to say just what a night gaunt might be like, since such cattle are known to haunt most persistently the dreams of those who think too often of them. Then Carter asked that captain of unknown Kadath in the cold waste, and the marvelous sunset city, but of these the good men could really tell nothing. Carter sailed out of Dilafleen one early morning when the tide turned, and saw the first rays of sunrise on the thin angular towers of that dismal basalt town. And for 2 days they sailed eastward in sight of green coasts, and saw often the pleasant fishing towns that climbed up steeply with their red roofs and chimney pots, and from old dreaming wharves and beaches where nets lay drying. But on the third day they turned sharply south where the roll of water was stronger, and soon passed from sight of any land. On the fifth day the sailors were nervous, but the captain apologized for their fears, saying that the ship was about to pass over the weedy walls, and broken columns of the sunken city too old for memory, and that when that water was clear one could see so many moving shadows in that deep place that simple folk disliked it. He admitted, moreover, that many ships had been lost in that part of the sea, having been hailed when quite close to it, but never seen again. That night the moon was very bright, and one could see a great way down in the water. There was so little wind that the ship could not move much, and the ocean was very calm. Looking over the rail, Carter saw many fathoms deep the dome of a great temple, and in front of it an avenue of unnatural sphinxes leading to what was once a public square. Dolphins sported merrily in and out of the ruins, and porpoises reveled clumsily here and there, and sometimes coming to the surface and leaping clear out of the sea. As the ship drifted on a little, the floor of the ocean rose in hills, and one could clearly mark the lines of ancient climbing streets and the washed-down walls of myriad little houses. Then the suburbs appeared, and then finally a great lone building on a hill, of simpler architecture than other structures, and much better repair. It was dark and low and covered 4 sides of a square with a tower at each corner, a paved court in the center, and curious round windows all over it. Probably it was basalt. Through weeds draped the greater part, and such was its lonely and impressive place on that far hill that it may have been a temple or a monastery. Some phosphorescent fish inside it gave the small round windows an aspect of shining, and Carter did not blame the sailors much for their fears. Then by the watery moonlight he noticed an odd high monolith in the middle of that center court, and saw something that was tied to it. and when after getting his telescope from the captain's cabin, he saw that that bound thing was a sailor and the silk robe was Oriab. Head downward and without any eyes, he was glad that a rising breeze soon took the ship ahead to more healthy parts of the sea. The next day they spoke with a ship with violent sails bound for Zar and the land of forgotten dreams, with bulbs of strange colored lilies for its cargo. And on the evening of the 11th day they came in sight of the Isle of Oriab, with Negranek rising jagged and snow-crowned in the distance. Oriab was a very great isle, and its port of Baharna a mighty city. The wharves of Baharna are porphyry, and the city rises in great stone terraces behind them, having streets of steps that are frequently arched over by buildings and bridges between buildings. There's a great canal which goes under the whole city in a tunnel with granite gates and leads to the inlet lake of Yath, on whose farther shore are the vast clay brick ruins of a primal city whose name is not remembered. As the ship drew into harbor at evening, the twin beacons, Thon and Thal, gleamed a welcome, and in all the million windows of Baharna's terraces, mellow lights peeked out quietly and gradually as the stars peeped out overhead in dusk, till that steep and climbing seaport became a glittering constellation hung between the stars of heaven and reflections of those stars in the still harbor. The captain, after landing, made Carter a guest in his own small house on the shore of Yath, where the rear of the town slopes down to it, and his wife and servants brought strange toothsome foods for the traveler's delight. And in all the days after, Carter asked for rumors and legends of Negranek and all the taverns and public places and where lava gatherers and image makers meet, but could find no one who had been up the higher slopes or seen the carven face. Negranek was a hard mountain with only an accursed valley behind it. And besides, one could never depend on the certainty that night gaunts are altogether fabulous. When the captain sailed back to Dylath Lean, Carter took quarters in an ancient tavern opening on this alley of steps in the original part of town, which is built of brick and resembles the ruins of Yath farther shore. Here he laid his plans for the ascent of Negranek and correlated all that he learned from a very old man, and had heard so many legends that he was a great help. He even took Carter to an upper room in the ancient house and showed him a crude picture where a traveler had scratched onto the clay wall in olden days, where men were bolder and less reluctant to visit Negranek's higher slopes. The old tavern keeper's great-grandfather had heard from his great-grandfather that the traveler who'd scratched in that picture had climbed Negranek and seen the carven face. Here, drawing it for others to behold, Carter felt very great doubts, since the large, rough features on the wall were hasty and careless, and the whole overshadowed by a crowd of little companions shaped in the worst possible taste, with horns and wings and claws and curling tails. At last, having gained all the information he was likely to gain in the taverns and public places of Baharna, Carter hired a zebra and set out one morning on the road of by Yath's shore, for those inland parts were in stone towers, were in tower stony Negranek. On his right were rolling hills and pleasant orchards, and neat little stone farmhouses. And he was reminded of those fertile fields that flank the sky. By evening, he was near the nameless ancient ruins on the yacht's farther shore, and though the old lava guard gatherers had warned him not to camp there at night, he tethered the zebra to a curious pillar before a crumbling wall and laid his blanket in a sheltered corner beneath some carvings whose meaning none could decipher. Around him, he wrapped another blanket for the nights were cold in Oriab, and when upon waking, once he thought that he felt the wings of some insect brushing his face, he covered his head altogether and slept in peace till roused by the maga birds and dense resin groves. The sun had just come up over the great slope whereon leagues of primal brick foundations and warm walls and occasional cracked pillars and pedestals stretched down desolate to the shore of Kadath, and Carter looked about for his tethered zebra. Great was his dismay to see that the docile beast stretched prostrate beside the curious pillar to which it had been tied, and still greater was he vexed on finding that the steed was quite dead, with his blood all sucked away through a singular wound in its throat. His pack had been disturbed, and several shiny knickknacks were taken away, and all around on the dusty soil were great webbed footprints for which he could not in any way account. The legends were warning of lava gatherers occurred to him, and he thought of what he brushed his face in the night. Then he shouldered his pack and strode on toward Negranek, though not without a shiver when he saw close to him, as the highway passed through the ruins of a great gaping arch low on the wall of the old temple, with steps leading down in darkness farther than he could peer. His course now led uphill through wilder and partly wooded country. And he saw only the huts of charcoal burners and the camps of those who gathered resin from the groves. The whole air was fragrant with balsam, and all the maga birds sang blithely as they flashed their 7 colors in the sun. Near sunset, he came on a new camp of lava gatherers returning with laden sacks from the Granite's lower slopes. And here he also camped, listening to the songs and tales of men, and overhearing what they whispered about a companion they had lost. He had climbed high to reach a mass of fine lava above him, and at nightfall he did not return to his fellows. When they looked for him the next day, they found only his turban, nor was there any sign of crags below that he had fallen. They did not search any more because the old man among them said it would be of no use. No one ever found what the night gaunts took, though those beasts themselves were so uncertain as to be also almost fabulous. Carter asked them if night gaunts sucked blood and liked shiny things and left webbed footprints, but they all shook their head negatively and seemed frightened at his making such an inquiry. When he saw how taciturn they all had become, he asked them no more, but went to sleep in his blanket. The next day he rose with the lava gatherers and exchanged farewells as they rode west, and he rode east on a zebra he had bought of them. Their older men had given him blessings and warnings, and told him he had better not climb too high on Negranek. But while he thanked them heartily, he was in no wise dissuaded. For still did he feel that he must find those gods on unknown Kadath, and win from them away to that haunting and marvelous city in the sunset. By noon, after a long uphill ride, he came upon some abandoned brick villages of the hill people that had once dwelt thus so close to Negranek and carved images from its smooth lava. Here they dwelt till the days of old tavern keeper's grandfather, but about that time that they felt that the presence was disliked. Their homes had been crept even up the mountain slope and higher they built, the more people would miss when the sun rose. At last they decided it would be better to leave altogether, since the things were sometimes glimpsed in the darkness, which no one could interpret favorably. So in the end, all of them went down to the sea and dwelt in the Baharna, inhabiting a very old quarter and teaching their sons the old art of image making, which to this day they carry on. It was from these children of the exiled hill people that Carter had heard the best tales of Negranic when searching through Baharna's ancient taverns. All this time, the great gaunt side of Negranic was looming up higher and higher as Carter approached it. There were sparse trees on the lower slope and feeble shrubs above them, and then the bare, hideous rock rose spectral into the sky to mix with frost and snow and ice and eternal snow. Carter could see the rifts and ruggedness of that somber stone. It did not welcome the prospect of climbing it. In places there were solid streams of lava and scoriac heaps that littered in slopes and ledges. 90 eons ago, before even the gods had danced upon its pointed peak, that mountain had spoken with fire and roared with the voices of the air thunders. Now it towered all silent and sinister, bearing ones hid inside that secret Titan image whereof rumor told. And there were caves in that mountain, which might be empty and alone with outer darkness, or might, if legend spoke truly, hold horrors of a form not to be surmised. The ground sloped upward to the foot of Negranic, thinly covered with the scrub oaks and ash trees and strewn with bits of rock, lava, and ancient cinder. There were charred embers of many camps where the lava gatherers were wont to stop, and several rude altars which they built either to propitiate the great ones or to ward off what they dreamed of in Negranic's high passes and labyrinth caves. At evening, Carter reached the farthermost pile of embers and camped for the night, tethering his zebra to the sapling and wrapping himself well in his blanket before going to sleep. And also the night a Vunith howled distantly from the shore of some hidden pool, but Carter felt no fear of that amphibious terror, since he had been told with certainty that not one of them dares even to approach the slopes of Negranic. In the clear sunshine of morning, Carter began the long ascent, taking his zebra as far as that useful beast could go, but tying it to a stunted ash tree when the floor of the thin road became too steep. Thereafter he scrambled up alone, first through the forest with its ruins of old villages and overgrown clearings, and then over the tough grass where anemic shrubs grew here and there. He regretted coming clear of the trees, since the slope was very precipitous and the whole thing was rather dizzying. At length he began to discern all the countryside spread out beneath him. Whenever he looked around, the deserted huts of the image makers, the grove of the resin trees, and the camps of those who gathered from them, the woods where prismatic magas nest and sing, and even a hint very far away of the shores of the Yath and of those forbidden ancient ruins whose name is forgotten. He found it best not to look around, and kept climbing and climbing until the shrubs became very sparse and there was often nothing but the tough grass to cling to. Then the soil became meager, with great patches of bare rock cropping out, and now and then a nest of a condor in a crevice. Finally, there was nothing at all but the bare rock, and had it not been for very rough and weathered, he could scarcely have ascended farther. Knobs, ledges, and pinnacles, however, helped greatly, and it was cheering to see that occasionally the sign of some lava gatherer scratched clumsily into the friable stone, and know that wholesome human creatures had been there before him. After a certain height, the presence of man was further shown by handholds and footholds sown where they were needed, and by some little quarries and excavations where some choice vein or stream of lava had been found. In one place, a narrow ledge had been chopped artificially to an especially rich deposit far to the right of the main line of descent. Once or twice Carter dared to look around, and was almost stunned by the spread of landscape below. All the island betwixt him and the coast lay open to his sight. With behind us stone terraces and the smoke of its chimneys mystical in the distance. And beyond that, the illimitable southern sea with all its curious secrets.